Hi, I'm Carrie Waller. I'm going to be doing a demo for you today. I am known for painting still life, mostly glass. I've done an entire series of light bulb paintings, and today I'll be demoing a small 8x8 light bulb painting for you. I just love the way that they're luminous, they have metal, they have striking colors, and we're going to talk about that process today. Here is my line drawing. As you can see, it's kind of intricate, and I do have masking. And we're starting my painting already in progress. In real life, this painting, which is 8 inches by 8 inches, took 7 hours. So I'm going to speed up. We're going to jump in and out and talk about techniques and processes for painting luminous glass. Here I've already started the light bulb on the left, and I'm dropping in color. You can see all of my little pans of paint right around my subject, my painting in the middle. Those pans are ones that I have made. I've put my own tubed watercolors in there and let them dry. I just reconstitute with water from the bucket as I'm painting. I like to start my process by mapping in shapes with a thinner, transparent wash. And then once they're mapped in, I start to build up and saturate the colors. I like to work one area at a time, completing it, getting my values where I want them before I move to the next. You can see here I'm almost done with that light bulb on the left. I have now moved on to the light bulb on the right. I'm working on the metal thread end of that light bulb. You would think with a metal that you wouldn't have so many colors, but it's like a mirror. It reflects all of the colors and shapes around it. So you can see here I've got a variety going from warm to cool in this top part of the thread. I've moved on to the bulb here. I'm in that mapping out stage that I talked about with that thin transparent wash. I'm adding opera pink into the mix right here. And we're getting those colors where I want them and making sure that the shapes are how I want them as well. These light bulbs have nice curves. Also in this composition, you've got, light bulbs behind light bulbs. So you've got a lot of different shapes happening, and you have to make sure they all line up. On top of that, there are colors that are shooting through this composition that also have to line up throughout the entire painting. And back onto my thread of my light bulb here. I'm working with a quinacridone burnt orange and just really getting the shape of this bottom thread. I'm dropping in some more color here. I don't use a palette. I learned a while ago to start mixing my colors on my paper. I end up with a clean, fresh painting that way. I'm coming back, I'm rechecking this light bulb over here. As things dry, which, watercolors dries 10 to 15% lighter. As it dries, I go back and I add in a wash of color, another glaze, if I feel like there needs to be some more saturation. I'm using a combination of Horizon Blue and Phthalo Blue Red shade. Back over here to this light bulb on the right, I'm using my quinacridone burnt orange again and doing that first step that I talked about, mapping out my shapes. So I'm starting with a thin, transparent wash, trying to figure out and make sure I get these shapes right before I build up the color. And then I'm dropping in opera pink into that quinacridone burnt orange. And there's some more opera pink right there in that light wash that I just did in that light bulb. And now I'm dropping in some Horizon Blue, Phthalo Blue Red shade into that center part. Some more Horizon Blue. You start to learn what colors will play well with each other and which ones don't. And here's some Carbazole Violet. So through painting all of these light bulb series, I have figured out a nice palette. Of course, my colors do change from painting to painting. That's part of the challenge. I like to have different themes, different color combinations. This is a complementary color scheme in this painting. I also have the logo of my light bulb in 3 different places that form kind of a triangulation in this painting. In that triangle shape, I like to do with when I add colors, when I add anything like a logo. I'm always trying to make sure it's in a triangle formation. Triangle is a very strong shape, and also it helps bounce your eye throughout the composition and not keep you in one location. You want people's eyes to go through the combination. That's my studio assistant, Dublin there, my cat. She likes to jump over my shoulder into my paintings. I'm back with my quinacridone burnt orange, doing that first step, that mapping in. So I have masked out and reserved my whites in places because I don't use white paint. There's Dublin again, she's back. I don't use white paint, so I've masked out areas, and I'm also painting around some white areas, depending on how much cleanup I want to do in the end. Masking is a blessing and a curse. So I use it more and more, actually, the more intricate my paintings are. But I have learned how to apply it very precisely. And if it's in an area that I don't think I'm going to be able to scrub out and blur a little bit, then I will paint around that area. I have Pyrrole Orange here. Pyrrole Orange is a great orange. It's this nice, hot orange that plays so nicely with Opera Pink, which I'm dropping in right now with it. The Pyrroles, Pyrrole Orange, Pyrrole Red, they're just like life of the party. And then Opera Pink, of course. With a name like that, how can you not be the life of the party? Glazing over, popping some colors back in. That Pyrrole Orange glazing right on top of those darks. And you can start to see the end of this light bulb taking shape. And I stop and I think, I end up painting with my brush and really observing my reference photo as I'm going. So I'm always double checking that I have marks in the right place. And when you get into a complicated area like the thread of a light bulb, you know, there's a lot of little shapes and things, and I want to make sure that they're lining up. I've got Pyrrole Orange on my brush again. Working out these shapes in this thread area. So my still life setups, I set them up myself. I always take my own photographs. I go outside. I have bags of light bulbs now that I have, and I take them outside on a nice sunny day, and I use a card table and put it out in the sun, and then I set them on a white mat board or a black mat board, depending on what background I want. I also have some plexiglass if I want more of a shiny surface, and I set them on that board, and I figure out a composition that I like. If it's windy, your composition kind of moves on you a little bit, so I like to do it on a day that's not too windy. But I'll set this up, and then I take my iPhone or my iPad, and I really get into the setup, and I can really photograph like a bird's eye view. I can get really down into the setup, and I can take all different angles. So out of one photography session, I may end up with a good 10, 20 photos of one setup from all different angles that I could paint in a series. So I do like to set them up and get as much as I can out of one photography session. I'll move things around sometimes. And when you have things on a card table and sitting on boards, like I was talking about the mat board or the plexiglass, you can kind of twist those, and you can figure out where your shadows are. Different times of day, of course, you get longer shadows or shorter shadows. Right in the middle of the day, you're going to have not much shadow at all, just direct sun above. So I play around with the time of day as well. Normally late afternoon is some of my favorite sun. And of course, different times of the year, you get different temperatures, different locations I've lived in, you get different colors of light. So it's really interesting. And I do that with all my setups, my still life, not just light bulbs. I paint all kinds of glass and still life setups, and all of them I set up outside. I'm putting in right now Bismuth Vanadate Yellow, which is a really great yellow. It's an opaque yellow. You can, of course, paint in a transparent manner with it if you just add more water. But that yellow, I call it like a bully color. It's a strong color. It'll come in and take charge. So I can put it on top of other colors that are reds and oranges, and it's really going to still bloom and pop. So it's great because I've painted a lot of things that are illuminated, and that yellow comes in very handy when you want like a glow or like a halo or firework effect. Still mapping this area here. Like I said, I really want to finish a light bulb at a time, and you can see in the threads of that light bulb, see how the darkest darks are in there. It's really imperative that those darks get in there right away, because otherwise you might be painting all of your other glazes, with not enough saturation. So I want to make sure that I'm really coming to this painting with enough pigment that I don't have to, sit there and glaze 100 times. I'm trying to get it in a few passes. The more you paint, the more you get to know your paints and your brushes. You also can, figure out less passes and glazes that you have to do. I am using a number 4 synthetic brush. I like the synthetic brushes. They hold less water. Here's Opera Pink being glazed in there. And the size 4, even if I'm doing a large painting, I will use a size 4 brush because I've figured out the control with it. It's kind of, like you have your best friends in your art supplies. I also, with my brushes, just like my paints, I know which ones and I know how to control them. So I kind of go back to the ones that I know. I have used natural hair brushes in the past, but I just really enjoy the springiness of a synthetic brush and that it holds a little less water, because I'm doing I call them controlled wet on wets. So even though it's a realistic painting, there's a whole series of wet on wets within this. You can see how I'm kind of doing small areas here. And I don't want to bring so much water that I'm making a soupy mix. I just want to bring enough so that my paint and pigments can play together and mix and mingle for me on the paper, which is important. I'm not using that palette, like I said, so I'm mixing on the paper, and I want clean mixes and mingling. Just refining these areas with the tip of my brush. I've got a combination of masking fluid on here that I'm going over, and then white areas that I've reserved with the brush. My masking fluid is just slightly off-white, so I can see it when I'm painting. I have a scrubber brush here. I'm pulling out some highlights. I think that brush is called an eraser. It's a nice kind of flat, stiffer bristled brush. Not too stiff. I don't want to damage the surface of my paper. I'm getting some pyrrole red now, and I'm popping in these hot colors. So this painting is all about complements, and all these blues and purples that are surrounding these hot yellows, reds, and oranges are really kind of setting the stage for these colors to pop. So adding some more saturation with that pyrrole red. And as you can tell, my paint has dried enough that it's not bleeding into those yellows and oranges. So I kind of, your drying time, you get used to that as well. My newer students, that's kind of what they're struggling with is dry time, when to paint things. I do a whole set, I can tell with the temperature of the paper where my dry time is. I use the back of my small finger, my little finger, and test the temperature of the paper, and I can kind of tell where it is. Of course, if it's shiny, it's too wet. It's wet, wet, wet. But if the paper is matte finish and you're trying to decide what level of dryness it's at, I do temperature checks. This is a color called Wisteria. It's a beautiful color. I'm mixing a little horizon blue in with that Wisteria. And we're getting these colors that are shooting through. The way I get these colors that are not necessarily natural in a light bulb, sometimes you have a light bulb that has a tint to it. There's reveal bulbs that have like a bluish or purple tint to the end, and they will shoot a blue color all the way through. A lot of times when you're outside, these bright blues that are in the thread of the light bulbs, that's the sky. So that's one thing that's kind of neat. You always have the blue sky reflecting in. So if you have a composition, any composition that you want to add blue to, you've got it with the sky popping through. Also, the bright sun, depending on where it's hitting, will also, almost illuminate these light bulbs in the middle and make that metallic, the metal shine, the inside shine a little bit. So the sun and the sky are helping with some of these colors. If I want to push it even further, I might add a colored bottle off to the side, or another colored light bulb, or a colored sheet of glass, and I can shoot colors through. And then when I take my photographs and I take them on the phone, it's normally hard to see when you're out in the sun trying to photograph. So you get them inside. I look at my phone. The nice thing with the phone is they're like thumbnails, and I can kind of quickly tell which ones are working and which ones aren't. And so I might go back outside and move some things around so that it makes more sense compositionally. I'm blotting with a paper towel here. Paper towel is one of my best friends. I always have them around. I'll have all these little pieces floating around at the end of a painting. And so I'm using those as an eraser in that case, a blotter. There's that wisteria color again. But what I was saying, I take all those photographs, I look at the thumbnails, on their photo to see which one's working. I'll pull a few of those, and then I go into Photoshop and I start photo editing, and I enhance colors. I might change color curves. I do things to make it the most beautiful. My whole goal with painting still life and these utilitarian objects, like ball jars and light bulbs, anything that's used a lot, I want to make them their most beautiful form, because they are kind of workhorses for us, right? We can't make it through a day without a light bulb generally. And so I'm trying to turn them back into art and show how beautiful they really are. And so that's my goal with my composition and with my colors. And I like it when a little magic in there where people are asking, how did that color happen? How did you get that? I know I've done my job well when people are kind of mesmerized by how that's working. I'm just working this bulb one little bit at a time. You see I've mapped in those shapes, and now I'm building up colors, having those colors shoot through those reflections. Getting into my oranges here. In the center of those light bulbs, they have similar to like a flower, right? So they have kind of that like stamen, those long cylindrical pieces in the middle of those light bulbs. And then we've got filaments and wires that are running through as well. And I never want to make them boring. I'm always adding extra colors, multiple colors to each of those, and letting those colors kind of blend in there so that there's no boring spot. I try not to have one area of a color that's not got something mingling in it, because your eye is going to kind of go directly to any large area of one color. So I want to have it mingle and be playful and beautiful. So every spot of this painting, everyone should be beautiful, every little area. Even when you're at the end of the light bulb or inside the dark center, there needs to be something interesting happening. Now I'm building up with some purples, a carbazole violet in here. Building up the color on the edge, my quinacridone burnt orange. Just getting that shape correct. And just going over, this is what, doing kind of a final pass. Making sure my values are where they're supposed to be. That's the good thing about having that really dark end right there, that little section that shows me how dark it's supposed to get. This is phthalo blue red shade. I have started using phthalo blue red shade a lot in lieu of ultramarine blue. I like less pigmenting colors, and the phthalos don't pigment as much. So it's kind of the counterpart. Quinacridones also don't pigment that much. So the quinacridones and the phthalos, I just love them. They're very saturated. They're beautiful. They make a big punch and not too granulating. Using the tip of that brush to get these nice lines. And I'm trying to get these blues and these colors in here pretty quickly. Like I said, I don't want to waste a bunch of glazes. I just want to get this paint in there. The less water I bring, the more glazes you're going to be bringing water and you're waiting for dry time. So I just try to get enough pigment in the first place. And you can do this and still paint in a transparent fashion. I'm just getting that phthalo blue red shade where I want it. All right, we're going to hop up to this light bulb here in the center, this middle one. Mapping those shapes in, the first stage of anytime I come to the paper, that's my first step, mapping in the shapes. And then you can see I've got this nice sunset colors that are coming through this entire composition. So those pinks and purples and oranges, and they're flowing through this painting. This color scheme was very appealing, and that's one of the things I liked about this composition. It's also hard to see it. The logo of the light bulbs was another thing I liked about this. I haven't painted them in yet, but you can see up in the top left some of the wording on the end of the light bulb. I did maneuver that a little bit in this composition. I wanted it to be in a triangle, so I have that one at the top on the left. I have it over here on the bottom right, and then there's another one kind of at the bottom in the middle. So I wanted the logo of the light bulb, the writing on the end of the light bulbs, to be in a triangle, drawing your eye into this painting. Mapping those shapes in here in the middle, I've got wisteria on my brush. I'm getting some phthalo blue red shade. Dropping it in. You see when I have a wet on wet, I can then just drop in pigment with the tip of my brush, and the water does the work for you. It mingles and lets it have these nice soft effects that are happening. I'm working on the end of this light bulb here. I've got my quinacridone burnt orange in a transparent glaze, and I'm mapping in these shapes. And then it's kind of a push and pull, so I get a thirsty brush where I rinse out all the pigment, most of the water is out, and then I can kind of push around that paint, soak up any extra that I don't need. Water, I should say, and pigment. So I'm working this end here. These light bulbs are kind of interesting, the threads, these metal threads. They normally have kind of a warm side and a cool side, the way that the light hits them. And so I'm working on the warm side of this one. Building up that quinacridone burnt orange. Getting those shapes the way I want them. Thirsty brush again, kind of pushing back. The pigment might travel a little bit, and then I'm trying to push it back into place so that I have a highlight in the middle. Like I said, I don't mask out everything that's white because some areas are harder to clean up at the end, so I mask strategically, making sure I have this translucent part of the bulb. And by doing these soft edges right now, not hard edges. I've got my scrubber brush, my eraser, and I'm pulling out some highlights and softening some areas. These areas are pretty much done. I'm not going to be adding a lot more paint on top of them, so I can disturb the paper a little bit if I need to scrub a little harder. But trying to get the highlight pulled out. I have these little eraser brushes in several sizes, and I end up using the smaller one a lot, but they're really handy. There's horizon blue, mapping that shape in here in the middle. Horizon blue is another color. It's opaque, but I can paint in a transparent fashion with it just by adding more water. It's a beautiful color. It's really a sky icy blue color. And it's pretty much in every painting that I paint. Just about every one. Getting those shapes that are shooting through the entire composition right now. I'm using wisteria. So I'm working on the very center of the bulb now. We've kind of jumped ahead. We've added our shapes and our, saturation in the top part of that bulb, and now we're getting this center area. There's a glass pillar that comes up the center of this light bulb, and so it's glass inside of glass, so I'm making sure I maintain that sparkle and that you can tell it's glass. I'm using the phthalo blue red shade again. Love that color. And carbazole violet. My darkest dark that I use in my paintings is normally an indigo sepia 50-50 mixture, but that carbazole violet in this painting, I use that a lot, just more saturated amount of it, and that is one of my darkest darks in this painting. I tried not to have too much of the indigo sepia because I'm trying to not have any black holes, like dark areas in this painting. I would like them to all be alive. I'll show you more about that when we get to the center of these light bulbs. This is my carbazole violet again that I'm building up in the center. It's a slow process, but it's meditative. I enjoy this process of painting, getting lost in the shapes and colors. That's what I find kind of addictive about painting glass. I'm building those shapes up. Pulling some highlights out again. All right, we're getting into the center part of this bulb down here. And I'm using my mapping out technique again, at the bottom and the center of this bulb. Mapping out my shapes with my transparent color, and I drop just a little, I bring a little less color in there. You can see I've got my shapes in there. Working on the bottom of this bulb now. Got my phthalo blue red shade. Just this little guy over here, this little bulb. You can see the center of that bulb too in there. I've got the quinacridone burnt orange. Building up these colors, just glaze upon glaze, getting the colors where I want them, the saturation where I want them. So even, we talked about having the base of these being dark and I don't want them too heavy. Same thing, and I want some life happening everywhere in this painting. Same thing with these filaments in the center. So we have these little wires and filaments that run through, but I don't want them to just be black, black lines. That just kind of stops your eye and is kind of dead. So with these lines, I've got opera pink, I have carbazole violet, I might even have phthalo blue red shade or horizon blue in places. I just want those filaments to have colors kind of shooting through them. And also, you know, it adds a little dazzle, a little magic, and you're kind of like, oh, wow, you know, it adds something. And I call that confetti colors. Whenever I have unexpected colors that are popping through in different places, and I do have that a lot throughout my entire painting, those are those little confetti colors. And they just add a little magic and sparkle that you're not expecting. You see that dark center now, that light bulb is done, and you see there's life in there. See the blues, there's some greens, some purples in the center of that light bulb, and that's important so that it's not a dark black hole. If I had done that just black right in there, it would just be dead. I'm adding a little more blue right in here. It has to get dark enough, but it also has to have some life to it. Working back on those metal threads. It's kind of fun with these light bulbs because, you know, you can have a silver one or a gold metal thread at the end of these light bulbs. I've done mixed in compositions. So it's neat to have that metallic element. I think these are all the same kind of light bulb in this painting. Sometimes I have different brands, different shapes. And I started painting light bulbs back in 2014 was my first light bulb painting, and I saw an article in the paper that said that the United States was going to start banning incandescent light bulbs, and that kind of was a call to action for me because my whole life and most people's lives, you know, you had these incandescent light bulbs, and so I knew that light was going to change, the look of light bulbs was going to change, and it just all of a sudden they became these valuable objects that I had in my house. So I literally went around and took them out of light fixtures and went outside and set up a composition. And since then I've painted several more. Like I said, I love painting a series. You learn so many things through painting a series. One painting will lead to another painting. You know, all of a sudden an idea will come as you're painting one. Or maybe as you're photographing, you had multiple ideas that happened, and, you know, it's exciting. And the more you paint one object, you know, the better you get at it. And it becomes kind of like a friend. And I could probably paint a light bulb in my sleep now. I've painted so many of them. And you get faster at it and more knowledgeable. And all of that just leads to, oh, what could I do next? How can I push to the next level? So I just think it's so important to paint in a series. And a lot of people think you should start small when you start out, but I actually disagree. When you have really detailed objects, I think it's better to start larger and really understand all the details and then move smaller. So an 8x8 of light bulbs, you know, that's a lot of detail in a small space. I've done 6x6s, I think is the smallest I've done with these light bulb paintings. And it's a lot of detail. So the larger you do it, and the more you really understand it, and then you can translate it to smaller. I'm building up with my carbazole violet down here. I did use the green colors on this light bulb that at the top of this one here, those pretty greens, that's a phthalo turquoise. Makes a pretty pop of color. And it kind of offsets just a little. You know, we kind of have these orangey reds, and now we've got kind of this greeny blue. So they're just off complement, you know, so they pop. And then having complementary colors within a painting definitely makes things pop. Building up. Same thing with this center section. We talked about having a dark area, and we want to make sure it's not a dead spot. So in this dark area that I'm working on in that little light bulb, I've got opera pink in there. Building up those colors. Whenever I have pigment on my brush and I don't want to waste it, so I always come back and I do value checks. I go to a bulb that's almost done, you know, as it's drying, it needs a little more oomph. So I go back and touch it up with the dark on my brush. I hate to waste pigment. That's why I don't think I would ever paint with fresh paint out of a tube every time, because I don't think I could throw it out. I know I couldn't. So I'm building up colors at the end of this light bulb, making sure it's popping. And this painting has lost edges and hard edges. So we've got some areas, you know, this light bulb, it's not completely complete and all the way around. There's areas where it stops. And also it's being magnified, you know, it's being seen through another light bulb. The tip of that bulb we're working on now, you see the end of it through that light bulb on the top left. So it's magnified. So anyway, we have areas where it's not lining up completely because it's larger in some areas, but it's important to not outline everything. You want to have like lighter areas of a line, darker areas, hard and found and lost edges. Very important in a composition. Just doing final touches on this little light bulb back here. Getting my colors where they need to be. Same thing here, going through, doing value check on the threads of this, making sure I got it dark enough in the crevices. Dark in those areas, and like we don't want it to be a dark hole, so we're doing, you know, like the Quin burnt oranges, pyrrole reds, those colors in there. And get them in a saturated, creamier glaze. And then now there's the cool part. Remember I told you there's a warm and a cool. The cool part down here, the blues, we're making sure we get those right. Checking my values, making sure my shapes are right. But I enjoy having this painting come to life, you know, a section at a time as I'm painting. I know it's working right now, and I've avoided that adolescent stage. You know, if you do the entire thing in kind of a mid value and then you've got to go back and keep adjusting and adjusting, you don't know until the very end how successful your painting will be. Getting our phthalo blue red shade and a transparent wash down here, building up shapes. I'm using my paper towel as my friend here to pull highlights out. Building up with some carbazole violet at the end of this bulb. All right, so we've got these colors built up down here on this bulb, making sure our saturation is right. More phthalo blue red shade. Just getting everything where we want it. Like I said, the end of these bulbs, they have reflections and they have, you know, shapes happening, and they're kind of softer at the end, more transparent at the end. So we're really making sure it's got that softness. So I have my little pans off to the side. You can see them here. They're in those little containers. People are always asking where they came from. I actually got those at a hardware store in Japan. but they resemble, of course, pillboxes, right? So the important thing if you're running any like this is to make sure they hinge at the back, not into the middle, and then they're labeled on the bottom with waterproof stickers, labels, and then I use a Sharpie or waterproof ink to label them, and then they're numbered, so I have swatched out every color that's in there. There's 7 in each container, and they have that nice hole in the center, so I have a little bungee cord, and so when I'm traveling, they all fit on a little bungee cord, and they're easy to get in and out of your luggage if you're going through TSA and you need to pull them out. And also they are dry, so you don't get, have too many issues with wet paint, because make sure you leave yourself enough time to dry them if you are trying to do something like that. They took me a couple weeks. If you put new paint in there, they take a couple weeks to firm up and dry. Working on the bottom down here, making sure my colors are right, my values are right, and using my eraser brush again to get that nice soft glow at the end. And we've got building up. We're trying to work on this last light bulb down here. That's going to be kind of the focus of our, you see it's got the writing on it. You can see that pretty legibly. So I was mentioning all these purples and blues are setting the stage for these bright yellows and oranges that are in the center of, and kind of flowing through the middle of this painting, swirling around, and so all those colors make them pop. Getting the bottom of this bulb, we're getting these shapes in there. Because it's glass, everything reflects, so all these shapes that they're sitting on, the reflections, they're all popping through the glass of the bulb. So here comes that bright center I was talking about, these oranges and yellows. So we've got a combination of the bismuth thanadate yellow. We've got our quinacridone burnt orange in there. We'll have some pyro oranges, maybe some opera pink. All those to make this glow in the center of this light bulb. Here's some of our pyro orange here that's popping in. And it's making it, nice and hot in the center here. And this is really kind of the star of the show. It's kind of where your eye goes to first when you look into this painting. And we're getting these shapes nice in the center here. We've got that, metal pillar kind of coming down the middle of this bulb. And not all light bulbs look exactly the same in the middle, different brands and types. Getting our quinacridone burnt orange. Building up those colors. You really want this to pop. We've got that other bulb. You can see that, through this one. So we're making sure that those kind of line up, even though they're a little magnified in the front bulb. Making sure that center section of that bulb, it looks alive, not a dark hole. So I've got this painting on a piece of corrugated plastic. That's what I use to stretch on. I don't get my paper wet anymore to stretch because I am using 156-pound cold press paper. So it's in between a 140 and a 300-pound paper. So it is stiff enough. And I don't use so much water that I need to fully stretch it with staples. So I secure mine with acid-free artist tape. So that's that white tape that you see around the edge. I normally leave a nice 1 inch or 2 inch border around the edge of my painting, so I've got a crisp line when I take that paint off, or I'm sorry, the tape off, and so it's got a nice border, and also it gives me something to secure to the matting with that nice overlap, or border, I should say. So I have those boards in a lot of different sizes, those corrugated plastic boards, and they're nice and lightweight, so they travel easily. And I really like them, just for, not only for managing here, you know, on up and off your desk, but also if you're traveling and taking them to workshops, they're not super heavy. I started originally with kind of like a varnished plywood board that I would stretch to, but they get heavy. I've got my horizon blue here mapping in. You're seeing, you know, other parts of things coming through this light bulb. So we've got these shapes that are coming into this light bulb. We're mapping those in. Using that tip of my brush to get nice crisp lines for these shapes. On here. Getting to the end of this painting. A large version of this painting, which I have sometimes will paint for a series. I might paint a large version and the small version. The large version of a painting will take me a couple of weeks, whereas this 8x8 took 7 hours. So, you know, over a couple of days. I don't normally spend 7 straight hours, depending on deadlines, but a larger version would take a couple of weeks. But I enjoy the painting process. That's really kind of that's what I get into, and I really enjoy that. So I don't mind taking a long time to paint because it's the journey, right? We're building up those colors in the center. Making sure that's nice and bright and hot. And we can see into the bottom of this bulb. So once again, we want to keep it lively. Adding some opera pink here. Always that opera pink is nice and hot. Opera is a fugitive color, but I don't mind using it because the base, at least in the brand I use, when the fluorescents fade out, which takes, I think, something like 50 or 60 years, you're left with a quinacridone magenta. So it's still a pretty color, just not as bright. So I don't mind using the fugitive opera pink because it's so important and such a pretty color. I try to think of it, you know, most of the paintings we see in museums, they've all faded, you know, or are not exactly the way they were. We still enjoy them, so I'm not too concerned as long as there's a nice base color that it will be in the end after I'm long gone. There's my quinacridone burnt orange to build up that center. Like I said, we're trying to keep it lively in the center. I do use a ruling pen for all of my masking. I use, like I said, that masking I use is basically a clear. It dries kind of an off yellow color, so I can see it on there. But I do use a ruling pen, which is kind of a drafting tool. I have a nice one from Japan. If you are going to invest in a ruling pen, try to find a German one or a Japanese one, one that's really well made. And it's almost like having tweezers on they open and close. They have a reservoir, so I use it not only for masking but also for painting, which brings me to the Panasonic logo at the end of each of these bulbs. When I put that in, I did use my ruling pen to do that lettering. So I just load it with my paint and use it like a pen. It's got a learning curve to it, like everything. Masking has a learning curve. You know, a ruling pen has a learning curve. Getting those colors really popped in the center here. Really making sure it's nice and hot. Building up those colors. See how that orange is kind of over there on that side too? See how it pops around? You have like a triangle of that orange color. It's popping 1, 2 up in the top and throughout that painting, so that it's pulling your eye through the painting. And some of these filaments are strategically in there. You know, they kind of stop your eye from going out of the painting and pulling you back down into the painting. So I'm always trying to be cognizant of keeping a viewer's eye in the painting. Doing final checks here, making sure the ends of my bulbs look right. Everything is saturated where I want it. Adding in some horizon blue here, making sure that blue is popping. So this is my final check stage here. Really utilizing the tip of that brush, getting saturated colors. All before I take off my masking fluid. Taking off the masking is last, and then, you know, any final touch-up after you take the masking off. The more you use masking, the more precise you apply it, the better you get at it, the less cleanup I have to do in the end. So it's kind of a challenge for me at the end. If I don't have much cleanup to do, I've done a nice job applying. I say that's my number one thing with my students is they apply it too thickly, too much of a glop, so they have more cleaning to do at the end. So if you hate masking fluid, that's probably why, because you're applying it a little too thickly. And I get a thinner masking fluid as well. Some are really thick. I don't use the thick ones. I use a thinner masking fluid. These colors are what was appealing to me about this painting. Kind of those sunset colors, also that complementary color scheme. But all of that was what drew me to this composition. This is a cropped in section of a larger composition. I will do that as well. I might have a large painting and I might crop it into sections to do smaller paintings. Especially if I'm teaching workshops, I'll crop into a smaller area to teach a workshop on that area of the painting. Doing final touch-ups. On this painting, it's small, and I don't want my signature to be overpowering. So I just signed with my first initial and my last name when I signed this, and I did it in a horizon blue color because I didn't want it to be too much and overpowering. Sometimes I'll mask out where my signature is going to go, but in this one I just painted on top with an opaque paint. It is important to plan your signature placement. I've judged shows where signatures have been in the strangest places. What I can tell you is if you look at a painting and your signature it pops out, don't do that. Make sure it's more subtle. And if you're going to have letters at the end, if you have signature status in shows, make sure they're subtle as well. We don't need to have a 3-foot line of signatures at the bottom with your signature. And I'm smoothing things out. I kind of have plain water on my brush and I'm doing like unifying washes, softening the ends of things, cleaning up. Just working out all the inside of this. We're coming to the end. Now you can see here where I've got my lettering done. I used my dark indigo sepia for my lettering. And you can see all the little maskings come off and it's all cleaned up. Thank you so much for joining me.